Welcome to Paulogia Live, where a former Christian takes a look at the claims of Christians. Live here from Paulogia Studios in the lovely Nova Scotia, Canada. Thank you for joining me here on a Saturday. I don't normally stream on a Saturday. This might even be my very first Saturday stream, so thank you for everyone coming in. I want to say hello to the chat and make sure that actually my chat is working. Look at that. Chewbacca Defense. Thank you, Chameleon. Welcome, Catherine. Welcome here. Eric, good to see you. Who else is in the chat? Oh, Captain Dadpool's in the chat. Hey, Captain Dadpool. I'm finally here. Anyway, it's been a while. It's been a minute. I had Canadian Thanksgiving a few weeks ago and was wrapped up in a lot of family events at the time. Also in the chat, let me know if you can hear my audio because I have a whole new audio interface since the last time I streamed live, which was, that's a non sequitur there, but let me know if the audio is good or bad. Anyway, Canadian Thanksgiving was wonderful. Some of my family was here, my parents, my daughter. Got to see them, which was great. Then after that was done, I got thrown into my next video, which is hopefully coming out Monday. Stay tuned on the main channel. It was heavy and a lot more involved than I wanted to. For some reason, I keep getting involved in these videos where I'm not responding to one video, I'm responding to like dozens of videos and trying to weave that into single narrative. It's a mistake. I need to stop doing that because it creates delays. But I wanted to take a break from all of that to hang out with you guys on a Saturday afternoon and talk about some weird, strange things that have been happening. For those of you who are regulars on Paulogia Live, you know that the show is kind of split into two parts. I have some topics that I've decided, and so often they're in terms of videos that I want to respond to. So that's the first part of the show. The second part of the show is where we respond to super chats and chat with you guys. Now, what I've been realizing as I've been cutting up the show as the YouTube gods want us to do, to create little snippets of best of moments for those not willing to sit through long live streams, like you, loyal viewers are. I have not had a lot of good super chat questions that I can turn into their own clips. So while we're going to go through some ridiculousness, boy, I need my words. Let me take a sip from my special For the Bible Tells Me So mug. We're going to have some ridiculousness, and there's going to be a lot to respond to there, but I'd love today for you guys to send in some stumper questions, some long-form questions, something that I need to chew on, so you can put that in the super chats, and we can have an extended, fun session of talking about something interesting and weird. But those get saved for later on, but send them in now if you want. We'll address those after the live topics. Now, since this is Paulogia Live and ostensibly my name, Paulogia, is in the title, sometimes I get to start on a few self-indulgent bits of things that just bring me joy before we get into the deep God-discussing areas of life. I have a couple of those for you today. The first one comes from a friend of mine from my Lucasfilm days, and his name was Steve Sansweet. Some of you who are hardcore Star Wars fans may know the name Steve Sansweet. He's written quite a few books on Star Wars. He was Star Wars fan liaison, official Lucasfilm fan liaison for many years, and he has the world record for the largest private Star Wars collection. Rancho Obi-Wan, look that up. I believe Rancho Obi-Wan even has a YouTube channel. It's amazing. I miss going to his museum of Star Wars stuff when I lived in Northern California. It's amazing. All that said, Steve Sansweet on Facebook sent me a note with virtually no context and just said, "Hey, Paul, you were on national TV last night." And so that's weird because I don't live in America anymore. Why am I on national TV in America? Well, let's take a look at the clip. And I'm going to keep talking through the clip, pausing briefly, because I'm actually kind of hoping to keep this stream monetized. And there's copyright material here, so hopefully if I break it up enough and we chat through it, we can still get through it. But let's see why Paulogia was on national TV.
One of the biggest challenges with doing a Star Wars film is that everything in the movie has to be designed. Everything from the forks and the tables to the costumes.
So that's my old boss, George Lucas, chatting about prequels.
Because every little minute detail has to be thought through.
My name is Freddie Goldsack, and I am the senior visual designer here at Lucasfilm in the Creature Penis Workshop.
The Creature Penis Workshop? What am I watching now? So those of you who didn't recognize him, that was late night host / comedian James Corbin, who I'm not super familiar with. Okay.
Every alien creature you see in Star Wars, I designed their penis.
So I will say, James Corbin, I used to work on the DVD extra materials as well as my other work. He definitely nailed the old school Lucasfilm vibe on documentaries. Well done.
I've been designing creature penises for Star Wars for over 40 years now. And it's to the point where when I close my eyes, it's all I can see. Oh, there's Admiral Akbar's penis. There's Greedo's. Oh, there's Watto's. Most of my designs...
I'm ever so proud.
It's never actually made it into the final films because they really just served as a reference point for George. You know, whenever he created a new character, he needed to know everything about them. What is that?
That is false. Actually, George didn't care about any background stuff about any of the characters. He cared about their... No, most of the time he didn't care.
Home world. What is their political affiliation? How do they communicate? What does their penis look like?
The most difficult.
I hope God this engineer is watching, because that's some whale penis level action.
Part of designing for a film is to create a kind of immaculate reality.
It was always nerve-wracking, whenever I had to present my designs to him for approval.
What the hell? There is Paul, me, circa, I want to say like 2001. I'm attending an art department meeting. If I remember correctly, this was a meeting about one of the things that was being discussed in this particular day was Dexter Jettster. Those of you who remember in episode 2, when Obi-Wan had his side mission to go like figure out who was trying to assassinate Padme. He went to that 50s diner, and we did Dexter. Anyway, what you see on the table here, blurred out, are not penises, but those were like head maquettes. Like literally they would carve in clay, soft clay, different head shapes that George could choose and pick from. And there, for some reason, I'm there. James Corbin, his special effects crew put him right beside me. We're having a little moment. Apparently I'm looking at him. Shannon and others also suggested that perhaps he modeled his character's hair after my circa 2001 hair. Possible, so that we would all blend in. As you can see, I was still wearing pretty much the same thing that I always wear. Anyway, that was super weird, and I thought I would share that with you guys. ever so proud to have been on national television to talk about the penises of Star Wars. Not something I ever expected to say. However, well, I think this next one also is in the realm of things that I didn't ever expect. Is this going to keep playing? Play. There we go. This is also something I never expected involving me, but it's a little more on brand for what the channel topic is today.
Next, they discuss how Paulogia, and by the way, Bill, I sent Paulogia an email and apologized for butchering his name.
Kevin Harris, the co-host of William Lane Craig's podcast this last week, they are not willing to let this dead horse lie. They're going to keep kicking the dead horse of the Kyle question that we broke here on this channel to reveal to the world about the 1 in a million chance. They have not stopped talking about that particular question, the brouhaha that has created. They were reviewing, actually this time, Kyle's own podcast about, well, I'm using their language now, his own video, his YouTube video about the topic. But in amongst that, Kevin here, letting everyone know that he sent a note to me for apologizing for mispronouncing my name, which he did do. But in the email, I read it as if he was pronouncing my name correctly. But he's apologizing while pronouncing it incorrectly.
So many times, it wasn't on purpose. In fact, somebody in comment, a couple of people said it in comment, you're mispronouncing his name just to harm his credibility. No, not at all. That's not the case at all. I was on a podcast. It was an atheist podcast. I was a guest on it several years ago, and they called it Paulogia with a...
Yeah. Paulogia, Paulogia. That's why I say it that way. Apologetics. So he's apologizing for getting mixed up by the correct way of saying my name and reverting to going wrong. This is just bizarre.
J sound for the G, and so it all kind of whirls around in your head, but it's Paulogia, and in this clip they just...
It's not, Kevin. It's not. It's Paulogia.
Guys, he poisons the well.
That was clearly poisoning the well.
So I got an apology from the William Lane Craig camp of sorts, but it was not from Dr. Craig himself, though he was chuckling along. And in the apology about my mispronounced name, they mispronounced my name. So 1 in a million, low bar bill. Good job, everybody. While we're on the topic of William Lane Craig, they dropped a new video a day or two ago that I thought was worth taking a look at. And so while we're on the topic of William Lane Craig, let's just keep rolling. Okay, so exciting news in the William Lane Craig social media front. They are going to start using the short form for William Lane Craig. I feel like perhaps what should be done with William Lane Craig at this point is to have him on camera less, maybe not more. But apparently we're looking for ways to capitalize on the whole TikTok and the short form media these days. And they're going to go with William Lane Craig Reacts, but missing the point entirely, which is kind of the MO. It seems like they've decided to put a 20-second intro of music on a minute-long video. What will after this will be like a minute. So, yay! Someone over there, you got the right idea. Can work on some execution. But anyway, let's see what kind of TikTok here William Lane Craig is going to respond to.
I am.
And you don't believe in an afterlife?
I don't.
If you don't believe in heaven and hell and all that, why don't you just go around raping and murdering as much as you want?
I do.
What?
I do go around raping and murdering as much as I want, which is not.
Which is not at all. So, I'm guessing several of my audience will recognize the voice of Ricky Gervais in this clip. That is because what this TikTok person is lip syncing to is a clip from Ricky Gervais' show Afterlife. Ricky, if you're watching, apologies for what's happening here. So, someone's lip syncing to Ricky Gervais. So, William and Craig's crack staff here, rather than like going and finding the actual clip that they want to respond to, which is about whether or not an afterlife needs to exist for life to be magical. They found a TikToker lip syncing to it. So, again, I think this is like strike two for the new William Lane Craig Responds series.
Not at all.
Because he's got a conscience.
What? If death is just the end, what's the point?
What's the point in what?
Living. Might as well just kill yourself.
So if you're watching a movie and you're really enjoying it, something with Kevin Hart in,
Yeah.
I've seen this clip now several times. I'm unclear as to whether that Kevin Hart crack is supposed to make it more funny. Does Ricky Gervais actually like Kevin Hart? Or was that supposed to be like some ironic joke? I don't know. Let me know in the chat. Is the Kevin Hart crack, is that a joke? Or is that serious? Or is it just supposed to be played either way? I don't know. Anyway, you're watching a great movie, something with Kevin Hart in it.
and someone points out that this will end eventually, do you just go, oh, forget it then, what's the point, and just turn it off?
No, because I can watch it again.
Well, I think life is precious because you can't watch it again. I mean, you can believe in an afterlife if that makes you feel better. Doesn't mean it's true. But once you realise you're not going to be around forever, I think that's what makes life so magical.
Well, now this...
So, it's actual, you guys get the point of this, right? This is also, Dark Matter 2525 has done similar videos, like with meals that don't ever end. For example, I've talked many times about how, of course, it makes sense that the things that in life that we value most are the rare things. That commodities, the more rare a commodity is, the more it costs, all that kind of thing. So this makes total sense to me. Ricky Gervais put it in the form of a movie. I thought it interesting that his character responded to no, because you can watch it again, which is very much not analogous to, it's maybe that character believes in reincarnation. I'm not super sure. But that's not super analogous to this Christian situation where you or maybe that is the idea of heaven. Maybe you were watching this life over and over again. That would suck. If I'm going to heaven, if I become a Christian and go to heaven, man, I want fresh start. I don't need to see any of this ever again. Except the YouTube parts, the YouTube videos you can have on repeat. Anyway, let's see what William Lane Craig says to the common objection that non-believers have, that only a finite life, not only a finite life is probably worth more than an infinite life.
This is really interesting because you have one person pretending to be another with an artificially dubbed voice. And that's
hilarious to me. So William Lane Craig doesn't recognize Ricky Gervais, and he thinks that somehow someone filmed this video and then someone like dubbed over the video as opposed to him lip syncing. It's just fun. It's all around. This is just a mess. I mean, William Lane Craig responds, okay, cool. But yeah, your video is way too long to be a TikTok video, as this one is. I get it. This isn't supposed to be, though. You had an intro. You didn't understand that it was someone lip syncing over Ricky Gervais. It's just delicious.
exactly what the atheist can do. He can pretend that his life has meaning and is significant, even though on an atheistic view it does not. Many atheists.
So all systems of value are some level of pretending, right? So the whole monetary system is based on us generally just agreeing that these pieces of paper and or even like just accumulated numbers in a bank, that we're going to allow that to be worth something, even though intrinsically it's not really worth anything. $100 bills doesn't have $100 worth of material in it, for example. All systems of value, including how we value our lives, is based on some level of fooling ourselves and or creating value out of something that doesn't actually have something. And that takes a lot of work. And it's something that when people aren't good at it, that's when they have a problems. And maybe that's sometimes when they have to turn to religion, when they can't actually find something worth living for.
From Nietzsche to Russell to Sartre have recognized that in the absence of God, to serve as a transcendent anchor for meaning and value in life, everything becomes relative and subjective. So
William and Craig, I don't think you're catching on here that even if God is real, attaching your meaning to a God, let's say God's real, the God of the Bible, choosing to attach your self-worth and your meaning to that God isn't subjective, because not everyone does it. We get to subjectively decide what gives our life meaning. So Christians subjectively giving their life to God, or to anchoring their life on the real God that really exists, is still a subjective choice.
pretending that your life has meaning, certainly you can do what the video suggests and enjoy life.
So even worse, what if the Christian God, the God of the Bible, isn't real? And you, like Dr. Craig here, have decided to, I'm going to give my whole life, my whole meaning is wrapped up in this Christianity that isn't actually true. You are, at that point, also equally pretending that your life has value. And Dr. Craig is on record saying that he likes his Christianity so much that he's actually, he sets the low bar. We've been through that all at once. He has incredible utility. He thinks that just Christianity offers you an amazing life here on this earth, even if ultimately it was to fail at the end. So, William and Craig, Christians, just like everyone else, is pretending we have meaning to help us get through the day. And you've pretended that your God is true, in my view. But even if he is really real, you just subjectively chosen this. You've missed the point, Dr. Craig. We're all pretending.
But that doesn't actually impart genuine meaning and value to your life. It's
genuine meaning and value. Well, what is genuine meaning and value? That would mean that you, again, meaning there's no other sense in which you can say something objectively has value. So, for example, if I am in a desert and I need water to survive, I've been days without water, and someone gives me several $1 million in jewels, that has no value to me because it's not something it's not what I need. I need water, and I would frankly give up the jewels for the water in those cases to let my life continue. So, objective meaning is a ridiculous, silly concept, because not objective meaning. Well, yeah, but objective value, right? You can say something has intrinsic value, potentially, so for example, wood has value in several different. Wood is valuable as a construction material. Wood is valuable for fires. Wood is valuable for shelter for animals in rains and storms, right? So there's things intrinsically that you can value out of it because they have utility. But that, again, is not an objective value. You're asking why questions about things that don't have a why. You're attributing objectiveness. And I'm ramping my way up for our last story of the day. I'm going to calm down and save some of it for then.
All a pretense. It's make-believe. And if we're more interested in truth than just make-believe, maybe we'd better ask ourselves, what is the objective basis for the values and the meaning that I affirm?
Oh, we have an outro apparently. All right. So what he just said there, if we value truth, then we need to take a look at this objective meaning. Well, here's the problem. Valuing truth, this has been my argument with you for the past couple months, Dr. Craig. Valuing truth when you value truth, you ignore the outcomes, you ignore the utility, you ignore the consequences of what if it is true. Again, he is asking for us, someone, if you're truth seeking, you really need to consider the ramifications of what you decide to be true. That is the opposite of truth seeking. That is finding an outcome that you like or looking at an outcome. It's an argument from consequences, which is the opposite of truth seeking. That is merely confirmation bias. That's like, oh, here's the outcome that I want. So, for example, I want my outcome that my life is healthy, so I'm going to ignore any diagnosis that says that I'm not healthy. That's just ridiculous. That's not truth seeking. That's truth hiding. Dr. Craig, I'm excited about this new format, even with intros and outros and all of this stuff, because it's hilarious to me. But no, not you. You failed on this one. Looking forward to your next one. Was I too harsh? Did I disagree? Let me know in the chat. Let me know in the comments. Did I miss the point? Did Dr. Craig make a great point? Or do you think that he's really nailing this social media thing and I should lay off him? Maybe. All right. Now we are moving into... Oop, that's what I want. We're moving into a section that I'm calling YouTube Shorts Proofs of God. Now, one of the things that TikTok and YouTube Shorts has done is it has given large voices to people who don't have much to say and maybe haven't thought out their arguments, but it doesn't matter because in 60 seconds, they can convince people. So all the videos we are about to look at now have racked up 6-digit, sometimes 7-digit numbers of views just in the last month, all professing that they have proof of God. So let's take a look. I believe there's 6 of them. We're going to rapid fire through them. Here we go, guys. 6 proofs, YouTube Shorts, God is real. Let's go.
Do you know that scientists have actually found proof of God and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ in human blood? Well,
I did not. Well, I actually kind of did. I immediately predicted where this was going because, oh my goodness.
whilst doing research, they found the most remarkable substance. It's called laminin, and it's the protein network foundation for most cells and organs in the human body. This is it under a microscope, and this is the molecular structure.
Look at that. Jesus. It's the cross of Jesus in molecular form.
Just like the cross of Jesus Christ. And the
All right. Let's take a look. Oh, we bumped ahead there. Let's take a look at laminin, evidence of divine creation. So if you want to just even, maybe before you make your short, you could go to Snopes. You could go to any number of websites and find out, hey, is this actually evidence of divine creation? Now, if you're a Christian, you're probably not going to agree with Snopes if they say, hey, this isn't. But you could at least take a look and see what the counter arguments are. So we're presenting all this, and here's the exact same diagram that he had up. Turns out that this, if you can see it in the chat there, it's actually sideways. So of course, this came from a textbook where they're outlining the structure of laminin. Is that how you pronounce it? Should have. I'm ill-prepared. Laminin. And they make a good point. Laminin actually also looks like lots of things. If you look at this straight up this diagram, it looks like a crucius. It also looks like a sword. In generally, it looks, just like any kind of X structure. If you were to throw a whole bunch of popsicle sticks in the air, let them land, I guarantee you're going to have some of them creating what's vaguely a cross shape. The point, of course, here is like, so what if can we just infer that any chemical structure that we see that looks like something else and if it looks like something that might be associated with something divine or something associated with something else, like, should we agree that that the God of war is real? Because, boy, it sure looks like part of the proteins in our body looks like a sword. I mean, it's the same argument, right? Anyway, but even worse, it never looks like this on our microscope. This is what a human diagrammed it as, so that in a textbook, people could take a look at what's going on. Under a microscope, it looks more like these. It's always flopping around like this. They're much more like, those used car guys that flap around. That's what they look like. They don't stay rigidly structured in a cross shape. So, no, my friend, this doesn't seem like it's a good point. Ugh. It's been a while since I've done this. All right, back to this. Nope. Now we'll cut that out.
Bible even proves it. If you believe Jesus is the Son of God, then like and subscribe and watch the video I pinned.
So, I think we can all connect the dots. Like, let's just this was proof. He called it a proof of God. So some of the protein in our body looks vaguely like the instrument of the story of Jesus's death. I don't get how it's therefore God, even if God exists. There's a million other explanations for this. It's not a proof. In fact, it's not even evidence. Like, sometimes when you say evidence is something that makes one conclusion more likely over another conclusion. A universe where God exists, are you suggesting that there would be no proteins that had a general X shape? There'd be no natural structures that have an X shape? Something similar happened after 9/11. A couple of the beams fell and landed in roughly an X shape to make people thought it looked like a cross. It's one of the most basic, simple shapes there is. It's not actually, it's like Jesus's worst day. Like, that's what we're celebrating. Yeah, no. But I don't think that was a proof. Let's see what the proof number 2.
Proof that God exists, part 4. Here in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 15, God gives Noah the measurements of how to build the ark. When the researchers and the scientists found this out a couple of years ago, it was the exact same measurement as stated in the Bible by God.
Wait, what? So, researchers only discovered a couple of years ago that the book of Exodus had dimensions for the ark? I understand this is a short format, but you need to put, like, subjects in your sentences, because you just said when scientists found this out, they discovered it was exactly what's in the Bible. Do you mean what is this that matches the measurements? There's lots of things that are roughly the same size as the biblical ark. He will never address this, so we are left wondering what it is that the scientists saw or found that was roughly the same. That they just discovered that Exodus had measurements. Whoop. Actually, it's probably Genesis chapter 6 to 11, somewhere in there. My bad, I got thrown. Genesis.
But wait, there's more. Later on in Genesis chapter 8, verse 4, in the Bible, it shows the location of where the ark rested on. I had to Google the location of where Mount Ararat is located. And Mount Ararat is located and identified as mountains in Turkey right now.
Well, this is true. There is a mountain range named, Ararat in Turkey right now. I think you can probably guess in the chat where this is going. I see Ron Wide is in the chat. Absolutely.
With the advanced 3D scans of the area, they were able to find the ark exactly where it said the ark rested on in the Bible. Whether you like.
All right. So let's go back to our tabs here. Archaeologists claim to have found the true location of Noah's Ark. So, I mean, one of the problems, of course, is that, the modern mountain range that's named Ararat is not necessarily in any way what, I guess, according to biblical timelines, like 6,000 years ago would have been, or maybe the flood was 5,000 years ago. That they all called Ararat. That's fine. No problem. You can say, hey, it's Turkey. It's all from a historical place. So you'll notice this is the exact picture that our TikTok gentleman here had up on his screen. Now, what you'll notice when you can see it large in the middle frame, the first one is sort of from a satellite overhead view, and you can see from that, of course, it looks a little bit like, oh, maybe that's a boat shape type thing. The middle frame, you can see what the structure actually looks like in 3D form. And on the other side, you see that so they did some seismic scanning of under the area, and there's a couple of people who are convinced that if you scan underneath there, that what you're getting in those black areas are some chambers, and what they're saying is, well, this is obviously a boat, because you scan under there and there's some hollow points, even though it's collapsed, there's some open structures. It was obviously a boat. Let me see if I can get down here. So perhaps you can read what this last sentence says. Still, geologists say that the formation, first unearthed around 50 years ago, is a simple rock formation. The border around this thing, everything about it, it's made of rocks. It's not petrified wood, it's rocks. To the extent where it's approximately the same size as the ark as well, it's really only the length, as I understand it. The width it's far wider than what the Bible said, to which they said, well, maybe it was the ark and it just fell, the pieces fell apart to make it crazy wider. It's not. It doesn't match the width at all. But also, it's based on cubits, right? So I don't know if you can see here. So your cubit was traditionally, basically, roughly, from the top of your finger to your elbow. That's a cubit. And of course, everyone has a different length of arm. So what is a cubit exactly? Well, there's a broad range of what is considered a cubit. And it's my understanding that only within the most generous of tiny cubits does this rock formation in any way even match what the biblical thing is for the length. So no, Mr. TikTok friend, they didn't find Noah's Ark. In fact, you can go on Answers in Genesis website where they talk about specifically that this is not a find of Noah's Ark. And if anyone wants Noah's Ark to be real, it's Ken Ham and the people who own the Ark Encounter. Although maybe they would lose some tourism dollars to the actual site, who knows. But no, so strike number 2. And frankly, even if Noah's Ark is true, that does not mean that the God of the Bible is true. Like, that's not proof of the God of the Bible. That would be proof of the veracity of that story.
Like it or not, it's the truth.
Mind-blowing.
So what he said there was, like it or not, it's the truth. Doesn't matter. Anyway, we're on number 3, mind-blowing proof of God.
Proof of God, part 6. Share this with a friend because everyone needs to hear it. I have proof. So the first thing I just want.
Again, it's always weird to me that you have 60 seconds and you spend, 12 of those telling people to basically to like and subscribe. That means you don't got much to say, but that's fine.
Have to say was we didn't come from a big bang. We were all created.
We didn't come from a big bang. Again, you've spent another 7 seconds just in a funny voice deciding that the Big Bang isn't accurate. That's okay.
In the image of God. The proof is within your DNA. There is no one quite like you in the world. You are one of a kind, and you are God.
Okay. Proof is in the DNA. You are one of a kind, and he's got up on the verse. Ephesians 2:10. You are God's masterpiece. Now, let's again go take a look at our tabs here. So Ephesians 2:10 in the NIV says, "You are God's handiwork, not your masterpiece." I should, let's go back. So he's hinging, if I'm understanding his argument correctly, he's hinging on the fact that the verse says you are God's masterpiece. And what he said right after that was, there's only one of you, your unique DNA combination only exists once. And because in his mind, masterpiece means once, therefore that verse is correct, and therefore God is real. There are lots of unique things. Of course, the Bible doesn't say, hey, every snowflake is a masterpiece, therefore, that's not a claim that the Bible makes. So I guess that makes sense that we're appealing to made in the image of God, masterpiece. The trouble is, we've got twins. Twins share the DNA. They are identical from that perspective. So the proof can't be in the DNA that every single human is unique, because we have identical twins, identical triplets, identical quadruplets, and so forth. So that doesn't quite work. Of course, when the Bible was written, they didn't understand genetics, so that really doesn't matter. But also, does masterpiece imply or infer in any way that it's that anything that's unique genetically is called a masterpiece? Well, no. Even in English, a masterpiece here, a work of outstanding artistry, skill, or workmanship, not one of a kind. We look at the verse he showed. We are God's handiwork in the NIV. Well, handiwork definitely does not infer uniqueness or require uniqueness. You can say that this chair is excellent handiwork, but the person who made it may have made 1,000 of those chairs. It doesn't work with that. But hey, maybe this is NIV is a weird translation. Some people won't like it. Let's take a look at all the translations. Man, I'm seeing workmanship, handiwork. I'm not seeing this masterpiece. Let's take a look. Can we find what translations say masterpiece? Okay, so the ISV says we are God's masterpiece. The New Living Translation, which is I considered to be pretty much garbage when I was a Christian, we are God's masterpiece. I don't even know what CJB is. OJB, pardon me. I don't know what OJB translation is. So we're back. So 3 of all these translations, 3 of them went with masterpiece for some reason. Masterpiece doesn't mean the same as unique. So you're a little tying together that because a verse says masterpiece and most humans don't share identical DNA, even though some do, you can't go ... therefore God. That's just not a proof of God, everybody. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong one. I need to stream more so that I know where all my buttons are.
God's masterpiece. So if you want real proof that God exists, take a look at yourself.
Wow, that's like, look at the trees, but it's like just look at the mirror. And from the mirror, you should be able to look at somehow notice your own DNA. and have remembered a book that you are a masterpiece, therefore God exists. Like, even if we are a masterpiece in some sense, well, no, because first of all, you'd have to demonstrate that we're a handiwork of any sort as opposed to a natural process. Sure seems like we are just the end result of natural processes, so we can't even go with handiwork, let alone that we're well made. Human bodies have tons of flaws that, be it from sin or not, if God is trying to mark our current shape as a masterpiece with all these flaws of sin, no, a lot of stuff doesn't work, and this doesn't seem like some of these design flaws are sin related per se. Anyway, huge fail across the board on number 3. Oh, we're halfway, guys.
For those of you who are seeking God, who are searching for God, who have
That's
to
like
have,
me.
you have to have some kind of empirical, factual, physical evidence of God, or you're just not going to believe.
And that seems reasonable, right? So we apportion our belief based on the evidence available. In order to convince me that a God would exist, I need just something. I need some kind of evidence for it. So it seems weird that he's like snidely putting people who need evidence in a camp of some kind of people who deserve derision, I guess. But let's see where he's going. He's gonna, you people suck if you need evidence. You're lame, but I think he's gonna give it to us. At least this video title said he was.
Here's my suggestion. I have a way to figure it out.
Oh, perfect. Write this down, everyone.
Figure out if there's an invisible God.
Mm-hmm.
Is he real?
Is he real?
Well, if the Bible is true and he is real, he's supernatural, which means he can be everywhere in the universe at all times. And he's...
That's not what supernatural means. Supernatural means not natural. Certainly we can all conceive of things that are not natural, that are not omniscient, as he, omnipresent, as he just described. But okay, well, I mean, let's roll with this. Maybe I'm being too harsh on him. He just means that it's not impossible for something supernatural to be omnipresent, I guess. Let him keep rolling.
He's the creator. Here's what you're going to do. Matthew 7:7 says, ask and you will receive. So go into your bedroom, shut the door, and say, God, give me a sign that you're real. Show me in my life. Come into my life and show me that you exist.
Okay. So have you ever thought of asking? Everyone, have you thought about asking him? Well, I'm in my studio, but the door is closed. Those of you who were with me for my last stream know that we were all took a second to see what God was going to tell us if we closed our eyes. But let's just ask God. I don't think I need to close my eyes. Maybe the prayer doesn't work if I don't close my eyes. But so God, if you are real, on behalf of all the people in the chat, the 300 and some people who are currently watching live, and all those who will watch in the future, we forgot to ask. I'm sorry. So please, we want to know if you are real. So please show us a sign right here on this live stream so that we can have the evidence we need to be convinced that you are real. I will wait. All right, well, that is too much dead air. We don't want that much dead air on the broadcast. So everyone let me know in the chat if somehow behind me, while I keep going on the next video, if God does something to demonstrate that he's real. I mean, we all forgot to ask, right? So the proof is that we asked somehow. All right, let's move on to, I think, number 5. Okay. So far we got a blue sky with clouds and a circle circling this cloud. It's just quiet. We're circling the praise God is real. Proof God is real, pardon me. And I don't know what that cloud is supposed to be. So I'm going to take a second. I want everyone in the chat now. What is this cloud? Like, is it a baby? Is it a dog? Like, let me know in the chat what you see when you see a boy. I'm going to put on my new special streaming glasses. Yeah, I'm with you. Hold on, I can't. Oh, clicking too slow. I don't see what is in this cloud. Oh, we got God's penis. Maybe this is as designed by James Corden, pardon me. That would be something. Looks like a head. I kind of see a chicken to the left, but that's not in the circle. So, fetus. Again, I don't get it. I don't see. It's a squiggly cross. Excellent. Squiggly cross like all the human DNA. Maybe, or someone made a good point. Is it the red circle in the sky? Perhaps I've never. Maybe this is real film. Maybe she didn't add that later. Maybe this red circle was circling something in the sky, because that'd be something. I see a Watto penis. I should have expected that to be coming. Snoopy. Oh. Casper the Ghost. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know what to say. What do they have to say about proof that God is real? Oh. That was it. I don't know what she said. All right. So maybe that's amazing. So I'm going to play this again. Everyone get your listening caps on. That's not a thing. Hearing aids in. You got earbuds like I got. Airbuds. Let's listen very carefully now. We're going to ignore the cloud. We're going to listen to what she says, and I want you to put that in the chat. What do you think that she said? So, was it amazing? Let me know in the chat what you heard, if anything. That's a baby? Maybe. I heard maybe you said that's a baby. What else did you guys hear? Anything? Okay, but you saw the caption, right? Proof of God. Circle in a cloud. We said something that no one can hear. Maybe that's amazing. Yeah, you guys are all agreeing with me. That's what I heard. That's amazing. So amazing doesn't even mean proof of God, right? Like something can be, lots of things are amazing that no one's even claiming has anything to do with God. Oh my goodness. I think we're 0 for 5 now, guys. Let's see if the best one is for last.
Scientists have found proof of Noah's flood. Christian or not, watch this video because this.
Christian or not, watch this video. So I'm not. So I'm in the target audience.
This will absolutely blow your mind. So scientists have confirmed in 5600 BC that the Black Sea had a major surging of water.
So that's actually correct. The Black Sea. There's a lot of evidence around the Black Sea that at one point the water level was much higher than it is now. So this is, we might be onto something. So far good.
Raised it over 100 feet, over 100,000 square miles of land.
Again, we're going to look at some slides later, but he's not wrong. So it does look like evidence that at some point the Black Sea was 100 feet or 30 meters for we Canadians, higher than it was at some point in history. And he's actually not, he's correct. This is like 7,000 years ago.
This would have been catastrophic for anyone living in this time period. This man...
It would have been. Now, here's what's interesting. You need to line yourself up, my friend, here with your young Earth creation people who think that the Ark was a global thing. 7,000 years ago, according to them, was before everyone existed. So if you're saying that 7,000 years ago there was a flood that would have been devastating to people who existed, you got some work to do. I'm just saying. I think people were around 7,000 years ago, so I'm gonna roll with you. Maybe you're an old Earth creationist. Let's see where you're going.
Robert Baylor, who went down and found the remains of the Titanic, also went down to see if this was actually real.
Okay, now it's time to head over to our slides. So, you know what? I'm gonna let's take a look first there at this flood that he's talking about. So, not so big flood. So here's a diagram of what scientists can reasonably say. It looks like that there was a flood, and what you're seeing in the dark blue areas is where the current water level is. But at some point around 7,000 years ago, it looks like some event happened that the light blue areas also were filled in with water. The speculation is that at some point it was a storm surge. This is very close to the ocean, and that it looks like there's actually evidence that this was an event where there was salt water mixed with fresh water, and so not unexplainable. Again, but took up a significant portion of the land, so not trivial. And some of the later finds will make it more interesting, just so you guys can get a perspective. So these underneath here, what we're seeing is some demonstrations of some of the underwater structures that we know are in that body of water. And the top one shows where we are now, and so the tip of this stone is displayed where it was. But again, they're saying 9,000 years ago in this article. It was indeed 100 feet higher, potentially. So confirmation, so far so good. So he wanted to tell me in the video put on screen, you can't see it right now, that Robert Baylor, and he spelled it Baylor, went and did some digging. Now, I was not able to find Robert Baylor, but I found Robert Ballard, because apparently Christians, when they want to present evidence of God, it's not important to put the actual name of the actual scientists, the actual people who make the discoveries. You just say whatever. If he was just speaking it, that'd be fine, but it was literally on screen. Anyway, so a gentleman named Robert Ballard went and he did an exposition down underneath in the Black Sea. Now, I don't know how well you guys can read this. Let me give you maybe a bigger view. That what he found was a shipwreck. He found several well-preserved ships. So if you find a ship underwater, is that evidence of a flood? Just a question. Does anyone in the chat think that a ship underwater is evidence of a flood? No. Ships tend to be in water. Shipwrecks tend to happen in water. That's not evidence that the water rose or went down. So, crazily enough, I didn't give up on this. He gave up on this far too quickly. There's actually much better evidence than Robert Baylor's boats, because again, a boat doesn't tell me there was a flood. But instead, actually several years even before Baylor went out there, there was two guys, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, who went and did some diving in the Black Sea area, and they found actual evidence of a civilization. Well, isn't that much better evidence that the civilization that they're talking about was, that when the water rose, and this has since been published, when the water rose, there was actually civilizations, colonies that were living close to the water, as colonies tend to do, and those were wiped out. So good grief, I found better evidence for your flood claim than what's in your video. Now, the problem is the two guys who found this, I would be very suspect. They went on to publish a book. Let me see if I can find what the book was called. Noah's Flood, The New Scientific Discoveries About the Event That Changed History. Now, I haven't read the book. It was published in 1999. I've not heard of it since. It didn't obviously shake the creationist world. I don't know whether these two men went looking to affirm the flood or whether they became believers in the flood after. I don't know, but it's somewhat suspect. I didn't go full on into this. My point is, Christians with your proof of God, do a better job than I do in actually making proof. What you just put on your video was that there was a boat. And again, all of these things are like 9,000 to 10,000 years old by all estimates. So, anyway, I'm getting frustrated. We'll go back to the video and let him finish out.
And what he found was shocking. He found the remains of human habitation over 7,000 years old.
No, that's a boat. You have a picture of a boat. I mean, a boat is a boat. It signals human habitation, but you had better examples. You could have gone to the other guys. A boat didn't tell me nothing.
Buried 300 feet under the surface of the Red Sea. Scientists even said that this points to a flood the size of biblical proportion.
Okay, did you hear that? The scientists said that this points to a flood the size of biblical proportions. So we brought up that diagram before. Let's go back to our diagram. Okay, so if you are of the kind of Christian who thinks that the flood of Noah was not a global event, that it didn't cover the entire planet, but that it was a regional flood, this would definitely be a regional flood. And there's been hypotheses that this would be a good candidate. It's roughly around, the Middle East. It's in the Middle East. This could have been a good candidate for something that inspired the Epic of Gilgamesh and a lot of the other flood legends that came from around the area, because it definitely would have been a significant flood. It could have inspired it, but is it biblical? Did it cover the globe? No. And I actually went looking for where the scientists said, that's a hyperbolic statement, right? You say, oh, this is of biblical proportions. And some people just say that things are of biblical proportions when they're clearly not. That's hyperbolic. But let me... hold on. I need to find it. Okay. So you saw my texting here. So here's the quote from this article that I found. So a new study in the January 2009 issue of the... I need my glasses on because I'm getting old. The 2009 issue of the Quaternary Science Review suggests that if the flood occurred at all, it was much smaller, hardly of biblical proportions. What scientists said was this flood was hardly of biblical proportions, not that it was of biblical proportions. Wow, I think number 6 might be the worst. I don't know. Which one do you think is worst? Is it the cloud? Was it the guy who just said, have you thought of looking? I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. What do you think was, of those 6, which was the most convincing and the least convincing proofs of God? I don't think we got there.
This just proves that the Bible is real. If you aren't an atheist, let me know in the comments. If you...
Wait, the video started with saying, whether you believe in God or not, this video is for you. And then he says, if you are not an atheist, leave a message in the comments. So he wants non-believers to watch, but don't comment. If you think he's full of garbage, keep that to yourself.
Love Jesus, subscribe now.
If you love Jesus, subscribe now. So he has this whole series, if I'm reading his intro correctly, of proof of God. And who he wants to see these are people who already believe in God. Isn't that neat? my channel, I don't really care how much non-Christians watch. I would love it if more Christians watched. That'd be all the better. If you are a Christian, please subscribe. If you are a Christian, please leave comments, because you are exactly the kind of person who I want to have conversations with and talk more about and present things. All right, folks, we're moving on to our final video of the day. And here's the thing. It's a little bit longer than I normally do, but today's Saturday. Hopefully you guys can stick around. Some of you, if you got to go, that's a terrible thing to say in a video. Stick around, because we're going to talk about Greg Koukl and morality. Here's the thing about morality. It's tricky to get the exact precise wording right, and I am working my best. To me, morality is very clear in my head, exactly what I mean, and exactly why this whole objective morality idea is nonsense. And it's all very clear to me, but there's a lot of language problems because people don't use words in the same way. And I keep trying and trying and trying and workshopping to come up with a way to express what's on my heart and in my head, and what I come to realize about morality in a way that makes sense to Christians. So in that ongoing effort to come up with the perfect phrasing and the perfect way to counter this objective morality stuff, you are all going to work with me today and go through Greg Koukl's absolute latest video on a lot of things as he takes calls, but one of the topics that he talked about was, can atheists be good? Which I think, I'm just so tired of that question, but we'll get to it.
I wanted to say something about morality and God, and I've just finished this book. Still got work to do on it, but the manuscript's in.
So Greg has taken time off from his main ministry, and he's gone to his cabin in the woods where he can go do writing, and I'm guessing that's why he's wearing his lumberjack jacket. I wish I had a cabin in the woods to go do some writing, because I'd love to do some writing, and I do kind of need to be secluded. So lucky him. He's not in his main studio. He's writing his book.
Great smarts, but there is a chapter called Good Without God, ? Because I think that evil is atheism's fatal flaw, not theism's.
Evil is atheism's fatal flaw. So he's talking about, a lot of people think that the problem of evil is the most obvious argument against the Christian God. And then it's a slam dunk. So people like Dr. Bart Ehrman, he thinks the problem of evil is the slam dunk, nothing about the text. I don't think the problem of evil is that big a deal. Many people do. But, and if you do, that's great. Everyone is convinced by different things. But Greg Koukl here is trying to say, well, no, problem of evil makes sense for God, but it's the atheist fatal flaw. So I don't know what kind of universe Greg is imagining where there's no God, but there wouldn't be evil. Like, is he trying to say that in a world without God, there would be no evil? And I'm using evil in the sense that he uses it. I'm going to complain about that in just a minute. But Greg's going to explain to us why the fact that evil exists demonstrates there's God.
But atheism's fatal flaw. And, of course, there is an attempt to demonstrate that you can have goodness without God.
I'm not sure who the atheists that they talk to who are mounting this objection. I'm guessing that people kind of viscerally, because Christopher Hitchens did this once, I think with Frank Turek, where he was a little bit incensed at what he thought was a notion of saying, well, if you're an atheist, you cannot do a good thing. I wish that it didn't have to get addressed over and over again. I think it's just silly. I think most Christians would admit that an atheist can fumble upon doing a good thing because the law is written on our hearts, right? From a Christian worldview, I think atheists maybe don't get too offended if you hear this, that they're trying to say that you can't do good things. They're not even saying that you're not a good person. They're trying to make a different argument. And it wastes a lot of time and makes everything more cloudy and more muddy than it needs to be. So don't take it personally when Christians say this kind of thing. They're not saying that you can't be a good person. They're not saying you can't do good things, as Greg will explain.
That's why I have a chapter titled "Good Without God?" ? Okay. Now, let me just clarify this, because I actually think this is one of the most difficult issues to make clear. It is similar to the relativism, objectivism issue, especially when it comes to morality. And because I'm not sure why. It's just an esoteric kind of notion.
It is.
It's not the kind of thing that many people have thought well enough about in order to make accurate distinctions. And it's just because they haven't been trained.
So I think that's actually the most important point that he's going to make this whole time. And that is when talking about morality, if you want to talk about it in any kind of meaningful way, you have to sit and think about it. And you have to do some philosophy, which most of us don't. Philosophy is lovely. If you're into philosophy, that's great. But most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about it and don't enjoy it a lot. Morality, the argument for morality plays on the fact that people don't think about this deeply. And I sure didn't when I was a Christian. We all go by our gut instinct when someone says right or wrong. Is this right or is it wrong? We have been trained with heuristic shortcuts all our lives to cut to the chase and say, well, is this an action that we consider to be moral? And of course, we don't even think about what that means. Instinctively, we are meaning things that don't hurt people. We know in our gut that it has to do with how we relate to others, whether we're causing them harm and whether we're helping them to achieve a better life or human flourishing, some of us might say. Those are the shortcuts that people who don't think about this make. That's the way kids are raised. You can ask a little kid, is something right or wrong? They're not winding their way through what they actually mean by that. It's a gut feel. And that is why in these conversations, neither parties tend to do very well because they're not defining the terms. And this is where I'm trying to figure out if honing my wording on this is all going to come down to forcing people to give me a definition of what they mean when they say morality, when they say good, and when they say bad or evil. Because what they're trading on and what's causing the confusion that people aren't thinking about is that Greg Kokel, as we will learn in a minute, is using the words good, bad, and moral to be equivalent to God selections, where I'm going with more of a gut instinct. If I haven't thought this through, most people are just thinking about it in other senses. But when you conflate, when half of the conversation is using one definition and half of the conversation is using another definition, you are going to maybe inadvertently agree and inadvertently disagree in ways that completely talks past each other. And even if someone wins the conversation, they've done it on false pretenses, and both people walk away none the wiser. So let's see if I can use this definition tactic. Greg wrote the book Tactics. If we can get down to using this definition tactic to point out to Christians like Greg, like Frank Turek, like a lot of people who use it, why we are not on the same page at least.
I acknowledge it's a tricky issue. I've worked in a lot of different ways to try to make it more clear, but
that's what I'm trying to do today. I'm just workshopping this. I'm seeing how you guys react. Hopefully you can let me know when we're done here whether this avenue is helping the morality discussion or hurting it or just adding nothing. We'll see. It's my goal. I would love to find a way to make this Christian notion of morality, to be clear to them that there's nothing God required to explain what we see.
And I think I do a pretty good job in the book. But the point simply is, can an atheist be good without believing in God? Well, if there is real goodness, and goodness is grounded in God. And this would be the moral argument for God's existence.
Okay, so catch that. Morality, per Greg, he just defined it for us. Goodness means grounded in God. So can an atheist be good? And by good, can an atheist be grounded in God? Well, no. An atheist, if you're defining good as grounded in God, then no, an atheist cannot, because an atheist doesn't think that God exists. So by that definition, no, an atheist can't be good, if that's how you define good. And this is the trouble with the loose terminology, but what most people are here when they say, can atheists be good, they mean, oh, can an atheist perform an action that conforms to my definition of good? And this is what I should have started with. And what do you mean? That's actually Greg Koukos' first tactic, is what do you mean by that? When someone says a word, you make them define it. What do you mean by that, Greg? What do you mean by good? You told us you mean grounded in God. When I say good, I mean an action or a thought that works towards my desired outcome. And of course, that the problem is not everyone have the same desired outcomes. That is I mean, for me, that's not a problem. Everyone has their own, what they think are desired outcomes. The nice thing is, enough of us overlap on what we desire. Most of us desire not to be murdered. Most of us desire that our car doesn't get stolen. Most of us desire not to be beat up every time we leave our house. These are just things that, because so many of us prefer it that way, we kind of just assume that that's what everyone prefers, and we treat that as a norm. So, if I'm talking about good as my desired outcome, and you're talking about good as grounded in God, we're not even talking about the same things when we're talking about good. Right? So, I'm hoping that if I can point that out to the Christian, that we're not even talking about the same thing, then none of what if you use my definition, none of what your arguments that will follow.
And I think that's the case. Objective evil requires objective good, and objective good could only come from an objective set of laws that require an objective lawmaker that has...
Okay, so this is where Greg again did a bait and switch on the question. So he went from question, can an atheist be good, to can an atheist be objectively good? And that's a whole separate argument of whether anyone can be objectively good. Sam Harris and others say that if you define a goal and you all agree upon a goal, say human flourishing, then you can objectively tell if one move is better or the other. Just like if you agree to the rules of chess, you can then agree that one move is more likely to win you the game than another move is more likely to win you the game. The objection that Greg is going to come up with is, well, so what if you agree to the rules of chess? Who's to say you want to win the game? Well, you don't. You're not obligated to want to win the game. So we have to narrow down the people we're talking to people who have goals that align with ours. If the goals don't align, there's no point in having a morality discussion.
The authority to make the laws. That part is not really difficult. Now, if there is no God, then there are no laws. If there are no laws, there's no law breaking. And
if there's no God, there are no laws. Well, that's, of course, completely ridiculous. Non-God entities can make laws. The question is, and of course, they have to make a law, you have to have some kind of structure by which you have an authority to enforce a law. Otherwise, it's pretty silly. But secular governments don't require God. So he's talking about some kind of moral ought, which I don't believe in, moral oughts. Outside of, again, if we agree to a subjective goal, like human flourishing, then we can tell that there are things you ought, if you want to win the race, you ought to run fast. if you want to encourage human flourishing, you ought to do X, Y, and Z. But it always starts with an if.
So there can be no evil and no good either. So if God doesn't exist, the atheist cannot be good because the term has no meaning.
No, the word you ask us what we mean by that. You can't say good means only in alignment with God, and because we don't believe in God, the notion of the word good is useless to us. We can't even use it. No, we just use it in a different way. We have a different definition. That's why we need to start with these definitions, Greg. You're defining good as associated with God. I'm defining good as associated with desired outcomes. If you just clear that up before we started, you wouldn't say stupid things like this.
No.
Stupid in a subjective sense, not an objective sense.
Nor can the theist or any other religious person, for that matter. If there is no governing authority over the universe that, in a sense, and here's a way of characterizing it to make it easy to understand, sets the speed limits of the universe, then there cannot be any speed limits, and if no speed limits, then no broken speed limits. Okay,
so that was a weird choice of things. So speed limits are entirely arbitrary. Speed limits are not, in my view, are not moral or immoral. Now, you can say it might be moral or immoral to follow the speed limit, but whether or not on a stretch of a highway, whether the speed limit is 50 or 60 or 65 in the American parlance, or 100 to 110, 120 for the rest of the world, probably not universe. Those are entirely subjective things, and the ability to enforce them is based entirely on authority, not on morality. So weird example, but I think it goes to the kind of thing that Greg wants to say. If you were defining good as just aligning with the will of God, then morality is just adherence. Morality is ultimately just adherence to an authority. It says nothing about whether your action impacts negatively or positively those people around you. If your authority happens to make rules that encourage that, great, but it's not necessary in your definition. All you're saying is what's moral is adherence to rules. Whereas secular humanists and other people who would accept that morality is all about reducing suffering and increasing well-being, then we have these discussions about what best reduces suffering and what increases well-being. And we are actually having a conversation about what helps most people, what helps individuals, and not just blind authority adherence.
Get the picture. So if there is a God, even people who don't believe in God can still do the things that are objectively good in some measure.
Yeah, that's kind of your broken clock is right twice a day kind of thing. Yeah, if I'm with you, Greg. If your weird definition of good, which is adherence to God, I could accidentally do something that adheres to what God wants. Definitely possible. Even if I'm the least godlike person around, I could accidentally do something that aligned with what he wanted. Sure. Irrelevant to the conversation. I wish it stopped being part of it.
They certainly can be good without a belief in God, if there is a God. But if there is no God, then there are no objective moral obligations, and therefore no one can be good or bad.
No one can be good or bad under your definition of good or bad, because your definition of good is adhering to God's will. So yes, if the only way you can be good is to adhere to God's will, and if God doesn't exist, then no one can adhere to his will. Great. But that's not how most of us define good when you try and slip this past us. We all have an instinct we have a heuristic about the shortcut of what we mean by good, and if we're not thinking about it deeply, we go ahead and let your definition stand, when that's not really what most of us mean. When we say that ice cream is good, when we say that going on holidays is good, when we thought it was a good book or a good movie, we had a good walk. How was your day? Was it good? These are just all ways of saying, did you get what you wanted? That's what we're asking. We're not asking, did you get what adheres to God's will? We're asking, did you get what you wanted? Was it good? Do not let the Christians redefine the word while we are still using it in a different way, because then these conversations will not happen correctly.
Because there's no standard. So if there is no God, atheists and Christians can all do the same behavior that we call good, but it would not be good for either because there's no standard defining it as such.
No, because if we went with my definition of just adherence to our personal objectives, adherence to overall goals that we've agreed to, maybe not, then absolutely there is goodness and absolutely there's badness, whether or not God exists. He hasn't even got to evil. I guess he's calling evil the opposite of like ultimately good in his God sense. We'll get to that.
They were just preferences or whatever, but it's just activity. Now, of course,
yeah, it's just activity. It's and we're describing whether these activities align with our personal wants and needs. That's what we mean by good.
The pushback at this point is the Darwinian model. Well, Darwinism can account for morality. Okay, now this is where we have to define our terms carefully.
Oh, so we spent this whole time not defining words carefully. Now let's see what Greg has.
If what you mean is Darwinism can account for our feelings of morality, our common understanding of what is good and what isn't good, maybe.
That's a big admission. So can Darwinian evolution, I know I don't like the phrase Darwinian evolution any more than you do probably, but it's fine. We'll use his terminology for now because we're defining terms, and he will define Darwinian evolution later. Darwinian evolution, maybe, in Greg's view, can account for why many of us think the same things about what we would label as good or bad. So this is making headway. Maybe we can account for that. Of course, we can't account for the kind of goodness that he defines as aligned to God, because by definition, you need a God for that. So that is what we call begging the question, right? When you smuggle in your conclusion. So keep in mind, as he said in the start, he wants to use this objective line of reasoning to prove that God exists. But he has smuggled into his premise that God exists because his definition of good is alignment with God. And because we instinctively, do you think anything in the world is good? Oh yeah, some things are good. Okay, well since I've defined goodness as aligning with God, you've agreed with goodness, therefore you've agreed with God. I smuggled that into my definition. Boom, I've assumed my conclusion, and you're trapped to agree with my conclusion, begging the question.
I'm not convinced that any system of natural selection working on genetic mutation has the capability of building belief systems in a conscious mind.
That's really weird. So he doesn't think that naturalism allows for belief systems to form. Like, I don't know what he considers. I'm assuming that he considers animals like dogs, for example, to be conscious. And maybe he thinks this is all God, but like dogs have belief systems. Like dogs believe in their own way that their masters will take care of them, or or that their masters will hurt them. Like they come up with these things that they anticipate of how things are going to work out, or they believe that if they go to their dish that they're going to find food or water, or they might at least find food or water. Like belief systems can't arise naturally. That's just straight up denial. So again, if he wants some transcendent morality out of this, okay, that's fine. But I don't know what kind of evolution you believe in if you don't think that it can produce belief systems.
Partly because there is no way to demonstrate that consciousness can emerge from material matter, and right and wrong are.
Okay, so then he's not actually even going along with the premise, because Greg's trying to answer the question, well, can Darwinian evolution explain belief systems? And his basic counter is, well, he's not accepting the other worldview for the hypothetical. Because he's just saying, well, no, I'm too hung up on whether or not natural processes can create consciousness. So he's not even playing along with the question. Because if you want to say, can the natural world account for this, you have to at least accept what the natural explanation would be, and that is that consciousness is an emergent property of our brains. And if that is true, do we still have a problem with morality? So Greg is answering a different question now. He's not answering a question. He's diverted back. He's shifted the goalpost to a different question. Can naturalism explain consciousness? Again, he says he's defining terms, but he keeps slipping.
Features of consciousness. This is why Daniel Dennett says this is one of the new atheists, consciousness is just an illusion. Well, if it's just an illusion, then the beliefs we have are illusory too.
Yeah, this goes all the way back to that William Lane Craig clip where he was like, well, if you're just pretending you have meaning, you don't have meaning. Well, no, if you're pretending you have meaning, you've found some level of meaning. And we argue, of course, that the Christians are all equally pretending to have meaning in something. Same thing with consciousness. If consciousness is some kind of illusion, and by that we mean it's not a separate entity, right? It's not a separate thing. That, again, if consciousness is an emergent property of our brains, I lost my train of thought. This Daniel Dennett, is it an illusion? If consciousness is an emergent property, then yeah, it's an illusion. We feel like that it's more substantive than it really is. That doesn't mean that it can't produce outcomes, though, and that's what we're trying to determine. That was the question you said you were asking. Can naturalism, can Darwinian evolution, in any way in its worldview, account for what Greg would call good and bad?
Which beliefs, according to them, on morality were caused by Darwinian evolution. So evolution is not going to get you out of the gate there, it seems to me, because beliefs are part of consciousness and evolution can't explain that.
What Greg understands of the evolution can't explain it. There are plenty of neuroscientists out there. In fact, it seems like most of them are not substance dualists, that they fully accept from a fully scientific perspective that as best as we can tell, until someone can demonstrate otherwise, consciousness is a natural product, not some supernatural dualist separate thing. So Greg's not playing along.
So, and if it's a delusion or whatever, then that's even worse. But let's just say it could. It could give me, let's just say it could give the whole human race certain common beliefs that end up serving our survival as a species.
Boom, perfect. So, yes, you finally played along with the actual premise and you're trying to analyze. So, let's say that natural selection gives most creatures, most humans, some common set of understanding about what is good or bad. Now, Greg is making the assumption that this, I think it sounds like he's weirdly assuming that this arose outside of experience. But if what we're looking for is desired outcomes, if good are things that lead to our desired outcomes, and bad is the things that lead us away from our desired outcomes. Obviously, in practice, one can find out that, that this plant is better to eat than another plant. It's more nutritious, or it poisons us less. These are obviously things that when you have that goal in mind, though your desired outcomes, and we'll get to it. If we share desired outcomes, we can share strategies to get to those desired outcomes. That seems so obvious to me. Why is it not obvious? Let me know in the chat. Let me know, why is that not obvious? Why don't Christians get it?
Helping us to effectively get our genes into the next generation in a productive way, not just willy-nilly creating a bunch of kids here and there, but rather...
I don't know what that has to do. So evolution is definitely pushed forward by creatures having kids willy-nilly, because willy-nilly lets you have more opportunities for genetic mutation and more opportunities to arise mutations that help benefit. So if you're looking for evolution to move forward, definitely have kids willy-nilly.
Building a functioning society that allows, in an ordered way, for us to increase the population. All right. Well, that.
So again, you keep putting, Greg, you're demonstrating that you are not understanding or not along with the hypothetical, because you've now put on qualifiers that will know I'm looking for something that does this in an orderly fashion, when evolution is anything but orderly. So if you are making artificial requirements that you will only accept an evolutionary explanation that has some kind of significant order to it, you're not looking for an explanation at all.
May be true too. That, let's just say that, even if I granted that, where is the locus in that way of looking at it?
Where is the locus? Meaning he's going to say what's subjected to. If I remember correctly, he's going to answer his own question in 3, 2, 1.
Of good and evil. Now, I think when most people think of, say, let's just say, racism.
Oh, he's not. Okay. Racism.
People think racism is evil in itself. Even those who believe it's good, they're still wrong.
People think racism is evil in itself. So now he's back to, he's playing with his definitions where, so is racism, let's say evil is a synonym for bad, and bad is a synonym for going against outcomes I desire. So some people, Greg acknowledges, they're fine with racism because it's not against outcomes they desire. In fact, racism may help them get to things that they desire. People who think that racism is bad recognize that for outcomes they desire, which is normally related to human flourishing on a scale outside of my own immediate circle, recognize that it's counterproductive to that. So again, we don't. He's smuggled in his God meaning of evil when he's trying to entertain this hypothetical about evolution. So he keeps shifting it. He keeps changing the definitions. He keeps conflating, which is why he cannot land where the rest of us, or at least where I have landed. I'm trying to workshop again. Thank you for being with me today on this Saturday afternoon to workshop with me how to express morality with Christians.
Because the locus of the moral quality is in the action itself. It's outside of us. But if we have merely a belief...
The locus of the action is outside of us. Well, the effect of the action is outside of us. The locus of the action, any action is determined by the individual, but the effect of the action, is outside of the individual. Let's see if that's where he's going.
If that racism is wrong because of evolution, where is the locus then of the morality? It's inside of us, in our belief.
No. So the locus of the objection for evolutionary standpoint is, does this increase our survival advantage or not? Does racism help us survive better? There were probably times in human history when racism did help specific tribes do well over other tribes. The question is, when you get to a certain point, you understand that the flourishing of multiple tribes is of benefit as well. And once you start expanding to whom you care about their flourishing, that's when you decide or come to realize that racism has consequences against your goals. If you're myopically focused, which some tribes had to be to get through certain stages of evolution or species or whoever, there's a certain sense of self-preservation that is necessary and does help. So that's why your labels of evil and your labels of good and all these objective labels are rather meaningless, and you are trying to fit your square peg into a round hole, and you're not accepting the hypothetical that you have adopted.
Not outside of us. And had we evolved differently, then our morality would be different on that view.
So that's interesting you picked racism. So racism, if we had evolved differently, would racism be moral or not? Well, it's interesting that one way we could have evolved, it's possible we could have evolved without our races having emerged at all. So we could have perhaps not had the genetic elasticity to have our melanin display differently, or perhaps we all would have evolved that our melanin would shift. And for those of you who don't know, melanin is the tint in our skin that that creates at least some of the racial differences. If we'd evolved differently, such that in winter we were all white and in summer we were all what we'd more considered to be darker skinned. If we'd evolved that way, well, then racism wouldn't have been that applicable, would it? So again, Greg just can't go with this hypothetical. If we'd evolved differently, things would be different. Yeah, they would be. And that's because we would have different desired outcomes and different ways to get there. Because perhaps that in-group out-group indicator wouldn't have existed if we'd evolved without races, for example. Or perhaps, if we'd evolved differently, that there would have been hypothetical races that didn't value survival, and those ones not only brought themselves down, but they would bring down other groups just out of some genetic necessity. That's obviously not the case with where we are now, but that's a hypothetically possible thing. Or there's hypothetically there are hypotheticals under which certain groups might help survival advantage better than others if you're dreaming up evolutionary scenarios. None of that is correct, just lest anyone be clear. None of that is correct in the way we evolved, but it's hypothetically possible, and the fact that Greg can't even consider this shows his incredible lack of imagination and ability to entertain a hypothetical.
Again, even conceding that Darwinism could create our moral beliefs, it still would amount to nothing more than relativism. That's it. That's all it would be.
No, Greg, if you're turning to evolution, and you're going to get to it, I'll let him get to it.
That's the inside-outside distinction I talk about. The moral code is inside. Okay, how about this?
No, it's not. If you're pointing to evolution to explain morality, we're definitely not looking on the inside. We're not looking to subjective personal choices.
Darwinism is true. Why should I be good tomorrow?
Wait for it.
Now, there's no answer to that.
Yeah.
The presumption.
Why should I be good tomorrow is to the extent to which you value the survival and the thriving of everyone else, you would be good. To the extent to which you don't value it, to which you're selfish, you won't. That's just the answer. And again, in such a short term as you're talking about in terms of one day, whether you're good on whether an individual is good in quotes on one day versus another day, that's not actually going to steer the ship for the billions of humans that are on the planet on an evolutionary basis. So no, Greg, whether or not I steal a chocolate bar tomorrow isn't probably going to ultimately affect the human race.
It is. I mean, I could hear the answer in my head. Oh, because this helps us to survive as a group. But there's a presumption there that helping us survive as a group, is it a good thing in itself?
No, this is where you miss it. So, good thing. If you are looking to evolution as the answer, evolution is entirely about which species survive and which species do not. Survival is the scorecard for how well you're doing. So survival is outside of us. We don't need to look at for an internal locus to say, did I survive or not? That is, did a creature survive or not, or how long did they survive, and did they survive to produce offspring, which is really the scorecard of evolution, is objectively knowable. It's not internal. It's not an internal locus. It's an external locus. Did that creature survive long enough to have a kid, have offspring? That's an objective scorecard, Greg.
What makes it good in itself? The long and short of it is, if Darwinism explains our view of morality, then we have nothing more than relativism.
No. If Darwinism explains morality, then the scorecard for what is good or bad is, did we survive to create another generation? So, yes, it doesn't comport to your God idea of morality, but if you're playing the game, the evolutionary scorecard makes total sense. And everything that we do when we behave in a way that helps the human species go forward further, to have more people have more kids, to maintain our social species survival advantages, those all completely align with that entirely non-subjective scorecard. That's why we point to it. That's why some, I don't agree, but that's why actually some people like Sam Harris will say, well, no, that is outside of us, an objective standard by which we can keep score. I still think we have to subjectively choose that as the scorecard, but actually nature doesn't. Nature has chosen that for us. If my species doesn't care about surviving, or if individuals don't care about surviving, they will not survive. So they will not, or they are less likely to survive. They will not contribute to the overall score going up. No God required.
Because biology cannot make anything bad in itself. It might be able to make us believe it's bad for the benefit of evolution.
If by believe it's bad, you mean we would observe that a certain set of actions limits our survivability or the creation of offspring, then yeah, we can observe that, and then it's still objective based on that evolutionary scorecard.
But it can't make the thing actually objectively bad. And
this is the same thing that William Lane Craig said in that first clip. And for those of you who stuck with me from the beginning till now, thank you so much. But if you remember back to way at the start of this stream where William Lane Craig was talking about, well, you can have meaning, but you can't have real meaning. Like, you just can't throw a word on there. Say, well, okay, you've explained X, but what about real X? Have you explained real X? Thank you for letting me workshop these thoughts. I'm saying them out loud because it helps. I'm probably going to do a future video on Greg Koukl and his terrible definitions of morality and why his conflating definitions go back and forth. And thank you for all the super chats. Those of you who missed the announcement to start, we are going to get the super chats very soon, and we will go through all of them. I'm just letting my conscious flow for now, stream of consciousness flow for now.
Things have to be objectively bad for there to be a problem of evil. Now,
Yes, that is correct. Things have to be objectively bad for there to be a problem of evil. That's why we don't point to an atheist problem of evil, because we just expect for things to not go our way with or without a God, right? That things can not work out. But if you demanded that there be some objective sense that there's, okay, well, that's a problem. But it's not the atheist or the naturalist who says that there needs to be this. When an atheist or naturalist puts forth the problem of evil, Greg, you know this, it is an internal critique of Christianity, because Christianity definitely posits an all-knowing, all-loving, all-benevolent God. The omnis are what get you, right? If there is a God that has all these omni characteristics, that is where the universe of negative things happening seems inconsistent. For some. It's not an argument I buy into, but for those that do, it's the internal critique. It is demonstrating that the God that you posit is incompatible with the observations of outcomes that we do not desire.
Said that, I've got some pushback from some who have said, wait a minute. There is an objective standard in evolution. It's genetic mutation and natural selection. That is an objective state of affairs that creates, as the idea goes, that creates the beliefs within us. So we...
Oh, you almost had it. Those genetic mutation, natural selection, it's not that it objectively creates the beliefs, that it creates the conditions that survival becomes the scorecard. And it just so happens for us that social cooperation helps us earn higher scores according to that scorecard. And what cascades down from that is that we have this general belief that we all have these general consensuses about morality, because the same thing that helps us survive is a lot of times the same thing that helps our neighbor across the country or across the street or across the world also helps them survive. So we've come up with we've discovered common things that help us do well in the survival department. It's easy, man. You keep fumbling. You get so close, and then you fumble.
We have moral beliefs about things that are grounded in an objective state of affairs, that being natural selection working on genetic mutation. Well, that is an objective state of affairs. There's no question about that.
Thank you.
I'm just presuming that it works that way, but still, these are objective things.
That was the hypothetical you were trying to entertain. So you're like, well, yeah, your hypothetical answers my question, but I don't buy your hypothetical. Well, that's not the exercise, Greg. The exercise is, does that hypothetical account for everything? And if it does, then we don't necessarily need, then we can get to this discussion about, which is more plausible, which is more natural, but you have now essentially conceded that, in your phrase, Darwinian evolution can account for what you would call objective morality, even though I wouldn't phrase it that way. I feel like you may have lost the game here, my friend.
But what is it creating? That's the point. You can have all kind of objective measurements that determine certain beliefs, or at least in principle, or maybe even certain behaviors. But what is it that makes those behaviors dictated by these objective standards actually right or wrong in themselves?
Well, they're not right or wrong in themselves. That's the thing. There are things that are right and wrong if your goal is survival, which is, if you're going with it, that's what evolution wants, you to survive.
Key. Just because you have objective standards to measure certain behavior does not tell you whether the behavior itself is objectively good. It just...
You'd have to define objectively good there, because is it real? Oh, sure, it's real, but is it really real? Like, you're adding nonsense words to the start, adjectives and qualifications that don't add anything to the conversation. They just allow you to escape what you don't want to admit.
Means that the behavior is objectively attainable by certain standards. This is nothing more than consequentialism, okay?
again, we're tying this back to Dr. Craig. Dr. Craig's whole worldview is, well, if you, at least Greg's agreeing with me here that consequentialism is a bad way to come up with a belief system, that you can't look at the consequences of a belief and just use that to determine whether or not it's true. At least we have that going for us.
Want to make really, really, really good spaghetti? Okay, then you go A, B, C, D, E, and you have really good spaghetti. So there are objective standards for something like that. Or maybe that's not a good illustration because food is subjective. Some people
There's
don't like.
There's an 11-year-old living with me. I can tell you that there is no objectively good spaghetti, because what the 11-year-old thinks is good spaghetti is terrible spaghetti to other people. Yeah, that was a bad example.
Spaghetti. So if you could do really, really good math, that is, you get the equations all correct. There are objective standards for good math.
Good,
At least
yeah,
when I
better
went to
example.
school. But that doesn't mean the answers that you get through some objective means are morally good.
No, we don't expect that we decided that when one rock and another rock are placed in the same pile, that we're going to call that two rocks. That's all that math is, essentially, right? It's labeling quantities, ultimately, and determining what quantities might be if you manipulate the piles of rocks in certain ways. We don't need there to be any moral. We don't need 1 + 1 = 2 to have any morality to it, for it to be useful to us, for anything. Greg has now made up nonsense things. Math doesn't have morality to it, therefore evolution can't explain morality. Like, those do not follow.
They are merely accurate. There's a difference between getting something accurate and accomplishing something that is morally good.
And again, Greg, by your definition, morally good means aligning with God. So you are actually acknowledging, of course, that accurate behaviors aren't necessarily the ones that align with God, which is interesting in mission. Maybe that's not what you're admitting, but it seems like it. Versus, I'm defining morality as the things that align with my desired outcome. So when I observe that it aligns with my desired outcome, I definitely can call it moral.
Okay. So this is the problem. Pointing to objective standards like natural selection and mutation to accomplish a belief about morality doesn't mean that the beliefs themselves, the moral quality of the beliefs, are grounded objectively in an objective moral standard.
They 100% are not, and nor are yours. If you define it as grounded in God, that is not any objective. Doesn't matter whether God made all of us. You're still subjectively deciding that what God wants is the right thing to do.
Now, if that's making your head buzz a little bit, man, I'm sympathetic. Because, like I said, I don't think this is always an easy way of putting it. All right, I should say always an easy way of trying to figure out how these things work together. But I think it's critically important because it does relate not only to human behavior and human community, morality, the basis for just law, appropriate.
So I argue that if your definition of morality is terrible for the flourishing and for good, just laws and those kind of things, if your goal is just laws, then just say what we want is just laws. We don't need God to decide what's just. We can just define what just is. Oh, all right. I feel like I've gone on long enough. There's a minute or two more in this clip. Again, as he said, spaghetti. The spaghetti fallacy. I first saw that as the spaghetti factory, but and that made my stomach turn as some kind of objectively good spaghetti. It's not. Anyway, but as Greg said, maybe our minds are buzzing here. Let me know in the comments. Let me know in the chat. Did any of my ramblings make sense? Which of my ramblings, if we're looking for the evolution of Paul's morality speech, which phrasing survives, which phrasing should be exported, since my goal is for a Christian to understand that evolution puts forth an entirely adequate explanation for the illusion, as it were, of good and bad, the heuristic shortcuts of good and bad that we all face, that we somehow conflate those with something more solid, but that's just because of lazy thinking. Let me know in the comments, let me know in the chats, if any of these phrasings were more helpful or less helpful in terms of getting there. And eventually, one day, if I live long enough, I will come up with some way to explain this in a way that even a Christian can understand. All right. So now is the time in the show where we read our super chats and we involve with the chat. I've been going for a little longer than normal. Oh, it's actually about normal time. Maybe just Greg Kokel wears me out. But let's get to our super chats. And let's see. I'm not sure which one's to start. But we'll start at the top with Heather Brown. Just goes to show they can't get enough of you. Well, yes. If you're referring to William Lane Craig, if this was back to then, I don't know why. This is like his 5th or 6th podcast that cascaded from that one Kyle question that I brought out. So the fact that this has its own life of its own is hilarious. Thank you to you, Heather Brown, for the super chat. Calvin Rouge, his message was retracted. So Calvin, thank you for your $10 super chat. I'm sorry that whatever you said, you took away, although I see if we jump one further down. I'm going to jump down to Calvin. We'll get back to you, grumpy old man. Do historians agree that the conversations in the Bible actually happened? I'm having a hard time believing any conversation can be remembered in full unless someone was recording it as happened. Thoughts? Excellent question. Thank you for understanding the assignment. I was looking for super chats that gave me an actual chance to talk about things. Let's all remember that grumpy old man was next, and I jumped ahead. Okay, Calvin. There are historians like Mike Licona, for example, a Christian historian, an evangelistic historian, who would say things like, well, the Sermon on the Mount, and he would acknowledge, was probably not a single sermon, but rather a recollection of Jesus's various sermons. So if you look and listen today at any preacher, and I would give examples in my sphere like Frank Turek or Kent Hovind or J. Warner Wallace or Lee Strobel, there's phrases and there's illustrations that they give over and over again, and it's almost a trope, right? When they speak, you know, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, or you believe you came from a rock, or there's all these like certain tropes and different ways. There is an evolution of these speeches. There's a natural selection in and amongst those of the phraseology, and that's what I'm trying to get to with that whole morality thing. I'm trying to find the phraseology that will resonate best, and that those ways of expressing things can survive my presentation, and the things that are less effective won't. If you preach every Sunday, if you preach multiple times at these things, you end up getting there. This kind of coming to the point. A lot of historians believe that Jesus probably was ultimately the same way. That Jesus probably wasn't giving one-off sermons the way it's laid out in the Bible, but that Jesus probably evolved in his 3-year ministry to certain illustrations, certain parables, certain ways of speaking that he would have repeated over and over again, and those would have been things that are more likely to have been preserved in the Gospels than, say, a one-off conversation that Jesus would have had. So your question was, do historians agree that the conversations in the Bible actually happened? A lot of historians, Christian ones especially, say that there is, even the skeptical ones, that there's probably in some of the speeches some core of historical memory, because some of it would have been repeated a bunch of times. The problem is there is no way to distinguish, and they would, Mike Licona, I asked him this question, like there isn't a way of discerning, even if you buy that premise, which ones fell into the category of, well, that we recorded that because he repeated it so often that that became a core that we can remember precisely, versus the other conversations. Looking back at it for us for 2,000 years later, literally no way to tell. So in a way, it's like, okay, I buy that argument. Maybe Jesus told that story a whole bunch of times and you recorded it pretty accurately the way he would have said it. Fine, we just can't know which is which. But some historians, Christian historians, do put forth that argument that Jesus did that. So not historians anymore. And frankly, that's not a non-historical way to think about this, some of these things. I think that's a reasonable historical way of trying to determine. Or at least it's a hypothesis, even if you can't come to a conclusion about which are which. Of course, evangelists and people who take the Bible as inerrant, or that think that the Holy Spirit was somehow involved, believe rather that the Holy Spirit gave them, the writers of the Gospels, some kind of divine memory, gave them some kind of spiritual insight to, as they were writing, putting pen to paper, to have supernatural recollection. If you are willing to go with the writers may have had supernatural recollection, well then, I guess, like who could, if the God of the Bible existed, would he have the power to make me remember something perfectly? Of course he would. So, I mean, it depends on, if you're trying to argue with someone, you're talking about having or believing in these things. It depends on where credulity is. I think that most honest assessors of the Bible would agree that you're getting the authors, even if you think they were eyewitnesses, right? You're getting at best their recollection of what happened, supernatural or otherwise. So I hope that answered your question, Calvin. Thank you for both of the super chats. I appreciate it very much. Back to Grumpy Old Man. In the William Lane Craig TikTok clip, the female voice is obsessed with Kevin Hart. Oh, that's why the Gervais character used the example. So thank you, Grumpy Old Man. I don't watch is it Afterlife? Afterlife, I should. It's embarrassing. And again, I mentioned before, Ricky Gervais has literally left comments on my videos before. So I never know. I mean, I think the chances are slim that he's watching any of this stuff. But he has left comments before, so it's possible he is, and I'm embarrassed. I don't watch Afterlife. It's a show I don't watch. Should I? Let me know in the chat. Do you guys watch Afterlife? Is it a good show? But that is an excellent explanation. Okay, so that character is obsessed with Kevin Hart. So that explains the joke. And I guess it's not so much a joke, but it's a natural interaction. Okay. Catherine Radonich. I hope I said that all right. Just wanted to say thanks for helping me become better at articulating the reasons I no longer believe and be a better atheist. Hart from Ohio, USA. Well, thank you so much, Catherine. That is one of my main goals here, is to, that is a service that I was provided when I recently came out by people like Seth Andrews and others that helped me articulate my thoughts in ways that I couldn't figure out. And I am so pleased. That makes my heart happy when someone finds some of that same thing in what I do. And that, frankly, that was the entire point of the last hour of this live stream, was me trying to find a good way to articulate this morality stuff. I will watch it back and hopefully watch your comments, guys, to see which things helped and which things did not. Anton Gomez left me a 14 Mexican dollar, which I guess I don't know if these are, anyway, a 14 denomination super chat, which is a hot dog. Yay! I'm toying with, Shannon is away this evening, and I can make anything I want. I'm toying with perhaps some kind of sausage bun type combo, which is, well, not a hot dog, because they would be glorious, yummy sausages. Anyway, that's something I'm considering for dinner, so excellent. Thank you for that in chat. The Ronan writes, $20 super chat. Thank you. This is so generous. Thank you, Ronan. Hey, Paulogia. I grew up without religion. I'm curious if you've seen a difference between atheists who are formerly religious versus those who grew up without belief. Love the show. Thank you. That depends a little bit on, that's a very general question. I was in my head trying to tie that to morality. You didn't necessarily mean that. What would I say are the biggest difference? So there's lots of challenges that someone who's the formerly religious have. So, for example, someone like myself, because of my religion, had less science education or less acceptance of science, less understanding of science works because of my belief system's distrust of science. Therefore, why would I invest time in it? So I had that challenge as a former believer. And I see lots of former believers who are way behind in our understanding of science in general, not just origins. There's a lot of forms of religious trauma. It can relate to sexual or physical abuses, though that's not most of the people, fortunately. But a lot of us can have attitudes messed up from purity culture or indoctrination or blind adherence to authority. Like there's just a lot of, or we were like had a tenth of our income stolen, and we had all these. So I'm getting around to what I see with there's a lot of challenges that the formerly religious face that we're envious of people who are always atheists because they don't have that. On the flip side, people who are always atheists, I find, are not super effective at communicating with the formerly religious. It's a real challenge to break through to a theist when you never were one. It's not impossible. There are people who do it. But it is, if there's one thing that we formerly religious are good at, it is at least empathizing more genuinely with people from our former sphere. And of course, that can break down to like, I'm going to have a better job of empathizing and communicating with a former evangelical Christian than a former Catholic, even though those are both, forms of Christianity, right? Or at least depending on what you believe. They claim to both be branches of Christianity versus, my experience may not do that great in relating to someone who is a former Muslim or a former Hindu or something, right? So it's not a knock. That's not a knock on the always atheists. I'm envious of the always atheists. I wish I had been wise enough to have invested in my belief system to come to that conclusion much earlier in life. Anyway, I hope that answered your question. I think that's my general thoughts. David Zebart. Some of you may know who that is. I'm not going to necessarily, he seems to have doxed himself. He could have been using a different handle. Anyway, Dave, cheers to you. But Dave Zebart says, loves the show, but where the hell are the singing cats? You must have tuned in just too late. We started with the singing cats. If you rewind the stream, it just started with nothing but singing cats. They were singing about William Lane Craig. They were singing my praises. Unfortunately, the cats continually pronounce Paulogia incorrectly. They say like Paulogia or other like Theologia. They're just so they had to go. If you can't pronounce my name right, you're cut. So that's where the singing cats are. Mark Rothenbuehler writes, why does it sound like every religious apologist would fail Philosophy 101 in college? I think that is probably correct, actually. They know, of course, the people they're talking to. Most people don't, either if they've taken even Philosophy 101, they don't retain it. There's enough buzzwords that they remember that it makes them seem like it affirms the former things. But yeah, I would agree. But I have not taken Philosophy 101 in college. Perhaps that is something I should do because I keep delving into these philosophical realms without, I'm still a fresh baby atheist. So I probably should educate myself more. I try. Let me know, Mark, whether I would pass or fail. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are. Olivia Williams writes, how can supernatural memories could remember speech different way? The Sermon on the Mount is not the same in Luke and Matthew. Oh, Well, that is a good point. So, except that the Sermon on the Mount is only in Matthew. So I'm curious as to what you mean, but there are definitely parallel stories. So one of the ways, being devil's advocate here, Olivia, I'm going to put on, I need to actually probably, maybe I should add to my thing, like my Christian hat. I should probably literally have, like Shannon and Matt have, literally their Jesus hats that they can put on. So I'm putting on my old Christian hat right now. If you're the kind of Christian that accepts a Q source, so for those who don't know, there is a hypothesis out there, because some of the sayings in Matthew and Luke are similar, if not identical, but used in different places and in different ways, that perhaps the authors of Luke and Matthew were both had access to someone's documentation of a list of Jesus' sayings, probably out of context. It was just like, hey, here's a Jesus quote book, a list of things that Jesus said. And then they both took those and they said, oh, well, this is a saying that of Jesus that applies in this situation or that situation. That would explain why anyway, that it allows for them being historically correct about these are actually words that came out of Jesus' mouth, but that Matthew and Luke used them in different places in different ways, because they didn't have access exactly to which one was used where. But so these were the actual genuine words of Jesus. It's just that the authors of Matthew and Luke made some mistake, and of course Luke is not even claiming to be an eyewitness, right? So Luke, right in the first two verses of Luke, is acknowledging that he's using other sources. So that's why the Q source theory is popular among Christians, because it does help to address that exact objection that you just said there, Olivia. So that the Holy Spirit could have divinely inspired Q, but not gone so far as to let Luke and Matthew know exactly where it should go. I know that's a dissatisfying answer. It should be a dissatisfying answer to a Christian, but it actually would have appeased me, or did appease me for a while. All right, well, as far as I can tell, that is the end of our super chats. I am going to now, just for another 8 minutes or so, if you want to tag me in the chat, let me go back to our main view. I will look and see what's tagged. Thank you, Mark. Jack, you'll get an A in my book. Well, thank you. I hope it was about philosophy, so that's kind of scary if my amateur fumblings get an A, but okay. Put that tinfoil hat on, Paulogia Live. Speaking of tinfoil hats, another show that we have on this channel is Toast to Toast AM, where we definitely need our tinfoil hats. If you didn't see our last episode, we actually had to break out our conspiracy bingo cards. But I think that 6 days from now on Friday, that we will be doing a special Halloween episode of Toast to Toast AM, where we will definitely need tinfoil hats. So come for that. John writes, I am quite sarcastic and contemptuous of religious, but I should emphasize that those leaving religion have the weight and shame of having been gullible and deceived. Yeah, and that lends to, for some of us, the angry atheist has to do with maybe physical harm or emotional harm, but some of that, at least especially for me, is that embarrassment of being fooled for decades, and how could I not have known? And there's some envy for sure of those of you who either came out sooner or never got sucked in. That is definitely a part of it. Undecided middle ground, no matter what, your religion had a hand in your children, that's worth it all. Well, yes, that is always the weird, strange, when you're a parent, a lot of times you can go back and you can imagine the what if scenarios, you go back to the future scenarios, and oh, well, if I could, go back and talk to myself and stop myself. When you're a parent, that always comes back to, oh, then my kids wouldn't be here. And that's always just kind of a stopper for the fantasy. So again, that's You're 100% right about that observation. We have one more super chat come in. A couple more, maybe. Oh, no, just one. Important to note, Paul, that Q is not considered by all scholars to only include Jesus' sayings. Absolutely. Q theories abound. There are as many flavors of Q theories as there are flavors of ice cream, for sure. But I have heard advocated that perhaps the Q source is a sayings only document. For those of you who are familiar with all the historical arguments for the authority of the Gospels, Eusebius puts forth a quote from Papias about Mark being, or not Matthew, about Mark being. Papias puts forth a case about Matthew, that Matthew was written in Hebrew and was a sayings document. That is one of the things that people who think that Q as a saying source would say that, oh, Matthew wrote two Gospels. He wrote this initial saying source that we call Q now, but that was really Matthew writing it in Hebrew, probably Aramaic, actually, if you want to hold to this theory, because that's probably what Jesus would have spoke. That was there, and then Matthew later went on and learned Greek and became very good at writing Greek, and he wrote that second Gospel that we call Matthew, so that both things can be true. We can have our Greek Matthew and our Hebrew Matthew of sayings. Anyway, it all becomes a fun game of what ifs, things that you can't. It's very difficult to substantiate, since we clearly, those who argue against Q, I mean, one of the arguments is, of course, we don't have a Q document. We're just, people are reconstructing it out of what was overlapped. Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh, is Shannon Q in the chat? Oh, Shannon Q's it. I heard Q. Q source. Shannon Q is the best Q source. You should definitely follow her channel to learn. Although she doesn't have a authoritative voice about what Jesus may not have said, but she is authoritative on many other things. Q source written by a time traveling Shannon Q confirmed. Absolutely. So I've got 3 more minutes. Anyone want to tag me with any questions or comments? If not, thank you for going with me once again. If you've stayed all this time, please, you must have enjoyed the video a little bit. Please subscribe to the channel. If you're subscribed to the main Paulogia channel, that doesn't carry over here to Paulogia Live, so subscribe to Paulogia Live. If you are watching this in a replay, please leave me a comment. Let me know what you would have said in the chat for all the questions we've been asking. What did you see in the clouds? Were any of those arguments for God good? Which ones are the best? Which are the worst? If none of that interests you, just for the sake of the algorithm, leave me your favorite emoji in the comments. And even better, leave me a super thanks of your favorite emoji, and that will help support both this channel and the main channel and all the work that we're doing. Once again, I need to get back to this incredibly elaborate video that I am attempting to get out for Monday. I hope you will join me for that. I will probably premiere it Monday morning or Monday afternoon. Stay on the lookout for my main channel for that. It's good is the wrong word. It's an elaborate one. So Olivia, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the subscribe and the like. Thank you for hanging with me once again. I look forward to more streams on this channel. So let me know what you like, what you don't like. Have a great day. And until next time, where's my outro? Until next time, later.